and welcome back to the Level 1 Tech's Ultimate Home Automation or Home Server series. And today we're going to talk about knowledge repositories. There's a great thread on the Level 1 forum. I started this a few months ago, and it's community participation. So as we go through this and do this, if you have something that is of particular interest, you share and do stuff, and it's really good. Knowledge repository is perhaps one of the least well-developed things that you could build on your home server. And a knowledge repository is one of the things that is, sort of most useful. I've been collecting information since probably before I was a teenager, and with varying levels of organization. Definitely not the best. Some people are data hoarders. Reddit/r data hoarding. I mean, I can see that. I can get behind that. But it's not enough to just hoard data. You also need to organize it and leave yourself some breadcrumbs so that you can get back to it and find it later. You see talk about people building a memory palace, or you see talk about people doing this, that, and the other in order to be able to remember everything. Don't bother trying to remember everything. Just try to leave yourself a path in your information so that you can sort of get back there. I mean, you spend hours, searching the internet, you find something, and you didn't bookmark it well enough, and then you spend hours searching for it again. We've all kind of been there. The method that I use for organizing my stuff really is just thinking about it and making folders and then dumping files in the folders. This is not really a new method. Like one of the first and perhaps best example of that is the ZettelKasten method. Now, ZettelKasten, that was the name of a prolific author, Nicholas Luhmann, who is a highly productive social scientist. He published 50 books and 600 articles, and ZettelKasten roughly translates as card catalog or card index, and he would make notes on cards, just like a card catalog at an old school library. Have the card catalog, you'd have to look up things. He would make notes on one side of the card about the information that he read that was relevant, and then on the other side of the card, maybe some keywords or other things that would be useful to sort of help find that or help remind him what that was about. And so by having the summary on one side and sort of the keywords and things that it was useful for on the other, he could sort of quickly put together a whole bunch of different sources of information about any one topic. And this is sort of before computers. If you make a bunch of directories on a file system and then put a bunch of files in those directories, it's really not a lot different than a card catalog containing a whole bunch of note cards. And so if you're interested in building for yourself a knowledge repository, I think the first order of business is to read up a little bit on the ZettelKasten method. So there's a great website on the ZettelKasten method, and there's certain software that's being built around it. We'll talk about all that. This is the second version of this video. The first version of this video was basically, look at me and my editor, and it didn't really explain the method really well enough. And I think the method will survive the software, because I was doing this file system and directory thing before I'd ever heard of ZettelKasten, and before there was really any software to help with this other than just software that would search a directory for files that contain a keyword. Because you can make a directory of PDFs, you can make a directory of things that you've scanned from other sources, like maybe you use the camera on your phone to take a picture of a document and dump that into a folder. Syncing your phone with off-the-shelf software with something else, it's never really been easier. So you can build one of these yourself without having to subscribe to anything. You don't have to have an Evernote subscription. You don't have to have OneNote in the cloud. And in fact, those things are kind of limiting, because those programs want you to live inside the program. OneNote wants you to live inside OneNote, when OneNote may not be the best way to embed an audio recording, for example, like with LiveScribe. So one system fits all is not likely the optimal approach, though, because if you take one system fits all, it's basically got to deal with infinite things. And does a set of infinite things contain itself? It sort of becomes philosophical after a while. And that's enough philosophy. Let's talk blue collar. Let's talk, how do we actually get stuff done here? Okay. Don't underestimate the file system. Think about this in very basic terms. You get, things mailed to you in the mail, bills, and you want to keep up with them. You get some stuff online, and, copies of your bank statement or whatever, and you want to keep up with them. You can create a directory structure. Think about how organizing that directory structure makes sense to you. Create a directory structure, and all you have to have is the discipline to put those files in the directory. Microsoft Office Lens on your phone, which I think is free, you can use to capture documents, or you can take pictures of documents with your phone. But the lens thing is great because it'll take a picture of a document and turn it back into searchable text, which is nice. If you have any kind of directory sync program, Dropbox, OneDrive, the sync thing, free and open source, Nextcloud, if you're using Nextcloud, you can have the Nextcloud client on your phone. It'll synchronize to something on your home server, hence how it matters for this series. But it's just a file system and a set of directories. Now, the other thing that's really amazing about the file system and the set of directories is that it's forward compatible with the future. That file system and set of directories would be useful all the way back to the 1970s. Now, granted, in the 1970s, they're not going to understand JPEGs and PDFs, but if you have your files organized in a directory, it's going to be useful for the foreseeable future. There are a lot of downsides to file systems and directories. File systems and directories, if you want to organize it more than one way, it's a little difficult to do that. If you have something in one folder that you want to link to another folder, it's a little difficult to do that. You can do that in your documents. You can make it somewhat easy, where if you consciously say, okay, I've looked at the notes in this document, and you leave a note to yourself in this document in this folder that's like, hey, this other folder has some stuff about this that may also be useful. That's sort of the original ZettelKasten way in the card catalog sense, where this note has some information that is relevant to a particular topic and may list other things that are relevant to that particular topic as that card catalog is put together. In terms of how it's constructed, it's not a lot different than files on a file system in a series of directories. Your top level directories are your drawers in the card catalog, and then your drawer can be further subdivided by more directories. That kind of makes sense. But I'm asking you to use your imagination too much. Let's look at this in the context of a program. One of the programs that has come up on the Level 1 forum that has been on my radar for a couple of years is called Obsidian. And Obsidian is an editor. It's a text editor, but it has a lot of really advanced features for organizing a file system directory structure, kind of like what I'm describing. And it works kind of like what I'm describing. But more importantly, because it's a markdown editor, you can also have hyperlinks to other things in the document. And this is where it gets really cool. Obsidian actually has some very advanced plugins for handling images and media, movies, audio recordings. There's a live audio recorder where you can create a note page and actually start recording right there. That's really handy. You can run that client on your phone, other different devices. They have a sync service you can subscribe to, but it's free software, but it's not free for commercial use. It's not Libra, and there are those things. But if you want to get into this process, you should still try this software. There are some open source alternatives. We'll talk about that, don't worry. But if you want to just kind of get into this and have your hand held a little bit, Obsidian is really, really good software for this. I would probably be using Obsidian if I didn't have, sort of the pre-existing history that I have, where it doesn't really exactly perfectly mesh up with the way that Obsidian does things. And yeah, I could just move around some files and directories and change the way that I do a couple of things, but old habits kind of die hard. One thing that I really like about the way that Obsidian works is those embeds, and they work so well. And so we talk about like the whole one-size-fits-all thing. If you have a really good ebook reader, I wouldn't want to supplant that by doing something that was less good inside Obsidian. So instead, having the plugin that links to the external thing, as long as it's also local storage, because stuff on the internet has a way of rotting after a while, as long as the link to the internal thing works well, then I've got no problem with it. And for like PDFs, Obsidian works great. I can embed a link to a PDF and actually have it take me to a specific page. And that works well with the Obsidian editor. So I can make notes and annotations about a book that's in PDF format, and it's not in the PDF. I mean, it would be nice if it was in the PDF, so that this thing is sort of self-contained. But with the directory structure thing, I can put a markdown file in the same directory where the PDF is. So 6 one way, half a dozen the other. But in the markdown where I'm making my annotations, I can at least go to a specific page in the PDF, and that's super handy, and that's definitely organizationally very awesome. Other than the PDF aspect, the actual ebook stuff, we've done videos in the past on Ubiquity and the Calibre server, and both of those are really, really good for hosting ebooks and all of the stuff that go with ebooks. But you can link to those from Obsidian, so you don't have to use Obsidian for ebook management. but you can use Obsidian for making bookmarks and keeping track of, sort of where you are. So, and then of course all these notes are searchable, and you can also employ tags. Now, a piece of advice that I would give you on tags, if you're tagging things, you're not going to tag with keywords based on the material that you've read. You're going to tag with tags that are for you to remember what this was in the future. After a while you get sort of familiar with what your own defects are, and like the defects in your brain and things that you're not likely to remember. So if you read a book on, let's say, asynchronous JavaScript, but really the reason that you're reading the book on asynchronous JavaScript is to solve a specific problem to build a platform, then in the keywords thing, you might tag it with the reason that you read it, or tag it with a specific problem that you had in mind while you were reading it. Or even if it's just a page or a section, like you read a page or a section and you say, oh, I bet this would be handy if I were ever building a thing like X. Then you can make a note and say, okay, on page 321, there was some information here about the modern way to approach JavaScript promises. And there might not even be keywords in the text for that, but by adding the annotation to a card, and that's all searchable, Obsidian or whatever else that you're using makes it really easy to get back there. And also when you're looking at things that have to do with asynchronous JavaScript or promises or online services, no matter what it is that you're looking for, you can get back there, and it works really easy. It has a graph where you can see which things are connected to which other things, with links, and even links to external documents that are outside the Markdown files that this supports. Now, if you're not familiar with Markdown, it's just a sort of quasi-universal text format that even after Obsidian is gone, you'll still be able to access your stuff. So in no way are you getting married to Obsidian by using it. And that's one of the reasons that, even though it's not open source and it's not free for commercial use, that I really can't fault them for the way that they've commercialized it here. It is if I had to commercialize something because I need to eat, this is how I would do it if I were a programmer working on this project, because it doesn't marry you to a proprietary format, and it doesn't really do anything insidious to lock you in. It's just genuinely useful. And for commercial use, they ask that you pay for it, but it's free for personal use. So if you're organizing all your adult life stuff, but not your professional stuff, then it's fine. You can just use it and sync it with all of your devices using not their sync, but the synchronization that you get with something like OwnCloud or NextCloud. Then it shouldn't be a problem. Now, I know that there's a fair number of graybeards in my audience, Unix aficionados that go back a while, probably been screaming at the monitor for a while now about Emacs org mode. Emacs org mode is worth considering, and I could introduce a whole new generation of people to Emacs. Emacs is worth learning. It's a really fancy editor, and one of the modes of that editor is called org mode. And it does a lot of stuff. You can do inline code evaluation, like you can basically put a comment at the top and be like, here's a little bit of inline JavaScript, or here's a little bit of inline Ruby or whatever, and it'll evaluate it, and then you can have the evaluation go somewhere else. But it's also a text editor, but it's also a markdown editor, but it's also an organizational tool, and you can use those features in an organizational tool. It'll help you organize Git repositories, and it can link to our plugins to help it link to media and documents and things like that. But you really have to learn it, and you have to learn it well, and it is not for the uninitiated. So in terms of like a universal knowledge solution, Obsidian ticks a few boxes that Emacs doesn't, but Emacs is also insanely extensible. So there's that. Maybe a happy medium between Emacs and Obsidian is another project called Foam. And Foam, I think it's funny because I think it's meant to be like a joke, like foam glass versus obsidian glass. I don't know. If not, that's a really funny connection. But Foam is, the author says it's only about 10% of the way there, but it's actually a series of extensions for Visual Studio Code. The Visual Studio Code is a free editor that is licensed under the MIT license. Asterisk, yes, I know. There's VS Codium, which offers Visual Studio Code without the telemetry, so you can still get Visual Studio Code if you don't want the telemetry. There is an open source alternative version of that, VS Codium, check that out. But Visual Studio Code, it's a series of plugins that makes Visual Studio Code kind of work like Obsidian. And so Visual Studio Code is really, it's a programmer's editor, but it also supports Markdown, and it also supports a lot of the stuff that Obsidian does. But it is, I'd say that it's more than 10% of Obsidian, but definitely not more than about 70% of Obsidian. So like like Obsidian, to be fair, I had trouble embedding like EPUBs and having those go to a specific page, but that worked fine with PDFs. Don't know why. There's probably a plugin or something to fix it. Emacs could do some stuff with inline evaluation that Obsidian can't do, and Foam sort of struggled with all of those kinds of things. But Foam, nevertheless, I found to be very functional and competent. And like all of the other solutions, it's not proprietary. It's not building a proprietary format. So if you move on from something else in the future, you haven't locked up part of your knowledge in a proprietary tagging system. You haven't locked up part of your knowledge in a proprietary file format. One other thing that I really like about Visual Studio Code as the possible editor for this is that it's possible to launch Visual Studio Code directly from the browser. That's actually another project and a whole other series of steps, and that is also not for the uninitiated, but it is possible to create a secure website where you log in and you launch Visual Studio Code, and you're using Visual Studio Code on a remote system, but it feels like you're doing local Visual Studio Code development. And so the whole need for synchronization goes away. This would work really well even over a relatively modest home internet connection running from your home server. It also makes some of the issues with sync perhaps go away, and because of the relatively high fidelity browser integrations when you're on a phone, if you use something like Office Lens, you can use Office Lens to capture the document, and then it's a second step to import that in the Visual Studio Code side of things. Whereas, with Obsidian, you kind of get sucked into the whole, oh, we want to sync, and the easy button for Obsidian sync is to pay the service. But you can DIY it, so maybe a video topic for a future day. I would say that if knowledge repository is the thing that you're interested in, the process is more important even than the software. And for me, it's really, there's three big steps for the process, and you can break it down however you need to. But the first step is being able to capture knowledge when it's being created or around the time that it's being created. As I read and think of things, I need to make notes as I'm reading and thinking of things, because if I read more, then the thought that I had will be pushed out. And I also find that writing things down in my own words helps me retain more of the meaning of what it was that I read. I can't be lazy and just copy paste the information from the book to something else if I'm reading it in an electronic format. Second, keywords. Thinking about the keywords that I want to use, not as keywords in and of themselves for the material, but more about keywords in terms of breadcrumbs for myself to find my way back here. So the context of what I'm reading is important, but also the larger context of, oh, I'm probably going to be working on a problem that involves X. I should probably put some keywords here so that when I search for that, I will also find this. But you don't want to overdo it. So you sort of learn to be really selective, but also judicious with your keywords when you're organizing your documents. And the other thing is you can't let the mess build up. So you have kind of a staging area where you bring those notes in. And for me, it's about every 3 or 4 days, about a week. The most I would let it go is like 10 days, where you've got this staging area where you've collected all of your notes, but they're not really organized in their final form. So I might look at the notes and just move them to the appropriate directory in the case of stuff that I've captured, with Office Lens or that I've used a flatbed scanner for. But in other cases, I will actually sort of rewrite the notes that I had, if I have a good memory of what they were, in a way that makes sense with where I'm putting them. Sometimes that's adding more tags, or sometimes that's just moving the document around a little bit to be more in line with how I'm using the information. Or in the several days since then, I might have a more crystallized vision of how that fits with the other stuff, the documentation that I read, or whatever it was, or whatever project that I'm working on. Hindsight is 20/20, and you get to sort of have a little bit more hindsight on whatever the thing is. And that's actually really handy, especially when you're talking to other people or having meetings or trying to organize a project. It's really handy to be able to wait a couple of days, and you still have those notes that you made on the day of, but just quickly skimming through that and saying, oh yeah, I could probably organize that under this because I'll need to worry about these features of a project, or I'm gonna need it's like, okay, somebody's coming out to work on my hot water heater. I'm probably gonna need to the warranty information and the other thing and something else and blah blah blah. And so you can sort of preemptively organize that stuff, you know, when you're not under the gun in the moment of capturing the note. So those 3 steps are really the 3 steps that help you build a knowledge repository one step at a time, but it's as much an internal process, something for you, as it is a piece of software. So something to keep in mind as you embark on this journey. And so I think that my thesis that when you're going to build a knowledge repository for yourself, don't underestimate the power of files on the file system and a directory structure and thinking about how you organize that. Don't underestimate that, because that seems like that's going to endure for another 10-20 years easy with these best of breed tools. Now, if you use Obsidian, if you've been using Obsidian for the past couple of years and you feel like you've got something really amazing you want to show off with it, let's connect on the Level 1 forums. You know, join the forums and send me a message or post a reply to the thread, because I'd love to do another video diving into tips and tricks with Obsidian and or foam and or something else that's like this, where it's sort of a knowledge management system that runs on top of files and directories and can have links to other things, to give an even better, more concrete, less abstract, less cerebral version of this video. But to get your head in the right space, ZettelKasten. All of this is basically just modified ZettelKasten approaches, and that kind of approach is something that I found useful in my own life over the years. So it's definitely worth looking at, and it's definitely worth adding insight to this thread. So this has been a quick look at Obsidian, and hopefully, you know, now you've learned something in terms of hey, ZettelKasten, there's a new word for a thing that does stuff. Or if you were German, you were just like, hey, he just keeps saying card catalog over and over again. It's probably fine. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. Let's connect on the Level 1 forums. If you got something really amazing in terms of like your knowledge management system, I'd love to show it off in the next Level 1 video. So let's connect. All right, I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 forums.